Welcome to another round of Drawing Board or Miro Board. Today we discuss technical diagramming with systems architect Maya. Let's go. First question. You've spent 10 hours slogging over a sequence diagram that should have taken 5. Drawing board or Miro board?
Drawing board. And if I'm being honest, Miro would probably cut that time down by half. You know, with its AI tools and ready-to-go templates.
Next, your diagrams become so bulky, it's more complex than the solar system. But all it takes is a few clicks and...
It's Miro. I've used those technical shape packs way too many times, and stuff is just digestible on its infinite online canvas.
Now, the final question. Everyone's brought in, but you have to make all these tasks all the way over in Jira. But wait, it's done. Is it...
Miro, easy with its two-way Jira sync. Easy to plot dependencies. Everyone always knows what's up.
And she's done it.
Join over 60 million people creating technical diagrams without workflow glitches. Get your first 3 boards for free at Miro.com. That's Miro.com.
Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Greedy corporate mega stores, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a law in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, tell your lawmakers, hands off my rewards. Tell them to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill.
Welcome to Washington in Focus, your source for the week's top stories in the state of Washington. I'm Cole Lauterbach, managing editor for the Center Square Newswire service. This week, we'll be discussing how child marriages are now illegal in Washington. King County's top official blaming a state property tax protection for their budget woes. One of Washington's busiest bridges facing major delays, and a snapshot of Spokane County's homelessness in the wake of Camp Hope. That's ahead on Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach.
Knowledge is power, and you deserve to know what happens in your state government. That's why the nonprofit Franklin News Foundation is bringing you straight news journalism through the Center Square, reporting on state authorities and publishing stories that show where your money goes and who spends it. By supporting the Center Square, you can track politicians' use of taxpayer money and demand transparency from elected officials. This is how we can equip everyday Americans to hold their government accountable. Become a supporter of Franklin today at franklinnews.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach. Now, let's jump into the headlines. For those unfamiliar with child marriages in a number of cultures, the thought of someone forcing a minor into matrimony sounds absurd, but it still happens. A new Washington law seeks to ensure it doesn't happen there without punishment. Capitol correspondent Carlene Johnson had this story. How is this just now becoming a law, Carlene? Isn't this illegal in most other states?
You'd be surprised, right? I mean, I was shocked to find out during legislative session when this bill was being debated that Washington was one of just 5 states that had no age limit on marriage. Now, when you look at the background on the previous law, it said if you were under the age of 18, so I'd say 17, as long as your parents gave you permission, that was a go. So, you know, a young couple in high school maybe got pregnant out of, wedlock, decided they're going to get married. As long as the parents agree for that 17-year-old to get married, that was fine. But if you were younger than that and say your parents were fine with you getting married at the age of 13, as long as a judge signed off on that, it was legal to marry as young as 12, 13 years old in the state of Washington up until this new law, which took effect June 6th.
And it wasn't, necessarily just the parents agreeing. It was oftentimes arranged marriages, and the parents were forcing their child, typically their daughter, into these arranged marriages with someone much older. And you covered some testimony on this legislation that was absolutely heart-wrenching.
Cole, there was a girl, now a young woman, but at the age of 12, she was forced to get married. Her parents actually were paid $6,000 by a man who obviously had, was a predator, a child predator, marries her off at the age of 12. So and that night, she's raped by this man. There was another story of a now a young woman and now since divorced, and an advocate for ending child marriage. So she was 15. Imagine this. So her parents are divorced. She goes to spend the summer with her dad at the age of 15. And that night, she's told, you're marrying this man who was 28. And that he takes her out of the country then, gets her pregnant, brings her back into the state of Washington when she's then 16 and 6 months pregnant. Then they legally got married because the first marriage was a spiritual thing. And the dad got out of child support as a consequence of marrying his daughter off at the age of 15 to be raped and impregnated by this man who it took her then 7 more years to get away from. It's unfathomable to any of us that have kids. It really
right. Yeah. And one of those who testified, they brought up an interesting point that the lack of the laws against child marriage in Washington amounted to what they call the get out of jail free card.
Right, because then once you, like in the example I was just explaining, when they came back and actually then she's 16 and then she gets legally married to this man, she was stuck and he was off the hook, right? Because it was signed off on at that point. They had the marriage certificate. So this guy proceeded to abuse her and she was trapped. 2 kids later, and as I mentioned, it took 7 years, and then it took 3 more years after she originally filed to get out of the marriage. And I was shocked. But now with this new law, you've got to be 18 in the state of Washington to get married. That one lawmaker, Senator Jeff Foley, was the only lawmaker to vote against the legislation. And his argument was, that he went to high school years ago with some, classmates who, got married at 17 and they're still together today, or in cases where someone did get pregnant. He said, I would hate to see someone, told that they couldn't get married if that was what they wanted to do before they would bring a child into the world, outside of wedlock. So, but he was certainly in the minority, and it is now law in the state of Washington.
Yeah. Now, in terms of, it's there was a lot of talk about, cultural, where this is a religious or cultural norm from, say, another country, where arranged marriages are in East Asia. It's commonplace. I mean, it's outside of the norm for you to get old enough to be able to pick your own spouse. And, it's just arranged marriages are just normally a thing. I mean, there's dowry in China where this is, there's payments and such. But the thing that, it gets my attention is the fact that, Washington is a very multicultural state. And with all of the people immigrating to Washington, it feels to me like the onus now is to ensure that those cultural norms do not break the current laws that are in Washington now on the books. But Carlene, just how common were these child marriages in Washington before the law took place? Because if you're not, like we said, if you're not familiar with it, you think it's probably wildly outside of the norm. Right. But I'm guessing there was probably more than you thought, right?
Absolutely. And you raised such an important point, which was brought up during testimony, Cole, too, because we've got a huge human trafficking problem in Washington state. We forced prostitution and the massage parlors, and it's stuff that we've covered at the Center Square. But that's a huge problem. And this study from Unchained at Last, and that's the national group that's been tracking this data, and they're the ones that are pushing this all over the nation for, to outlaw child marriage. Their study between 2000 and 2021 in the state of Washington, 5,048 children were married off. And in most cases, this was 83%, according to their statistics, were girls between the ages of 13 and 16 that were, in many cases, forced to marry adult men. And many times, these men are 10, 20, 30 years older than these young girls who were married off. It is. I was shocked. Yeah. As you said, I would think the numbers would be minuscule, that it's a few people. No, it's been happening far too often. But hopefully this bill will make sure people are complying with the law and it stop the tide of this.
Right. Now, what's the punishment for breaking the new law? And I guess there's some nuance to it, as you explained in your story, right?
Yeah, and I wish that there were a harsher penalty. Originally reading the bill summary, I scrolled quickly down to the bottom and thought, oh yeah, this is a Class C felony, punishable by, $1,000 fine and up to 3 years in jail. But interestingly, that punishment is only for lying on the STD form about getting married. It was, if you can't lie to your would-be spouse that you are coming into this for an STD, or you both have to say, yeah, we both know that, this person has an STD, or we both do, whatever. It is that is punishable for lying on that form. But otherwise, the penalty under this law, unfortunately, is just voiding the marriage. I think lawmakers may well have to go back and potentially alter this to make the penalty, something serious for doing this. Otherwise, it could still happen.
Harrowing story. Thank you, Carlene. Good stuff. I appreciate it. Moving on, King County is facing a budget deficit, and not a small one. In his annual State of the County speech, County Executive Dow Constantine spent a considerable amount of time saying that the county would be in a much better position if a state property tax protection weren't in his way. Seattle reporter Spencer Pauly covered the county executive's speech. Spencer, how exactly did the county get into such a budget hole in the first place?
Well, Executive Constantine would be the first one to tell you it's because of a state law that establishes a 1% annual cap on property tax increases for counties in the state. Now, he says that King County's population has continued to grow at an exponential rate, and there's also been an increasing inflation, all the while creating this general fund deficit, whereas you see more and more people needing essential services that the fund provides. And
Constantine maintains that if this protection, saying that homeowners on their property taxes cannot see an annual increase over a set amount, something that's commonplace in states across the country, that if that were not in place, they could fill that gap much more efficiently, meaning he would intend to raise taxes to cover that deficit.
Absolutely. He mentioned during his speech that counties in Washington do not have the ability to impose other taxes such as your business and utility taxes to boost the general fund, whereas, Washington cities and the state itself are able to do. So he says basically property taxes are essential for the county to get over this general fund deficit.
Right. But that's, and the thing that was very telling about that is that a property taxpayer, I mean, if you're not a homeowner, you might not necessarily be as familiar with this, or if you do it, what you do for a living, Spencer, you might not be as familiar, where a property tax bill has multiple lines. You're being taxed by multiple entities. In some states, it's 13, 14 different entities. That take a cut out of your property taxes, where sometimes it's more than the escrow for the actual home loan. And in terms of the county saying, well, we can't put a tax on, utility tax. Well, they don't necessarily aren't the ones that are responsible for that service. And so they would just be looking to tax something on a business, for instance, that money would normally go towards a service provided by the municipality or the state, for instance, that then goes to that service. Now, has the county's budget grown or has it shrank in recent years? And COVID obviously is going to be an outlier on this.
Yeah, I'll start right before COVID. So King County has a biennium budget, 2 years. That's what they set. So we can go back to the 2019-2020 budget, where the entire county budget was set at $11.7 billion, a good chunk of change. When the 2021-2022 budget, it jumped up to $2.4 billion. Now for the current budget, the 2023-2024 budget, it skyrocketed over to $15.8 billion. That's a big jump in
That's huge.
In costs. Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, so it's not like, and that money comes from businesses. That money comes from homeowners already.
Right.
And I think we had talked about this in a previous show, Spencer. The homeowners in the Puget Sound region aren't exactly enjoying a low tax environment right now, right? In terms of overall tax burden.
Yeah, it's no secret, but I can refer to a recent survey I've covered in the past, or as a survey of Seattle voters, Seattle based in King County, the largest city within. That survey showed that 80% of voters believe taxes are high enough and that they do not need to increase levies or establish new levies to, increase their property taxes. Yeah. But you're on the other side, you're seeing King County and Seattle basically threaten cuts to essential services. In the case of Seattle, there's this new transportation levy that is looking to be placed on the November ballot in the future. And they say if we don't get this passed, we're not going to be able to pave sidewalks. We're not going to be able to fix our aging bridges and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And in this case, King County, Dow Constantine said in his State of the County address that if they're not able to address this $35 million general fund shortfall, they're going to make cuts to public health clinics. And he said that these clinics help a lot of lower income families have access to public health.
Right.
And with threats like that, it has, an impact on your taxpayers and say, well, yeah, you're putting the blame on us.
Exactly. Right.
It's our responsibility now to fund these services.
Yeah. And so many counties, very much like King County, expanded exponentially services during COVID with that one-time money. And now that money's gone, that well's gone dry, and they're looking to maintain those levels of budgets and saying, well, if we don't increase the tax burden on property tax owners, businesses, etc., the puppy gets it. Yeah, essentially. So thank you, Spencer. I appreciate it. This one is this will be definitely an interesting budget cycle for the largest, most populous county in Washington. The I-5 bridge just south of King County over the Columbia River connects Washington to the Portland metropolitan area. The interstate bridge carries more than 130,000 passengers over state lines on any given weekday. Money was set aside to build a new bridge, but it appears the construction plans have been pushed back a bit. Investigative reporter TJ Martinell had the story of this red tape. Wasn't this replacement, TJ, supposed to begin in 2025?
Yeah, it was supposed to begin next year as far as construction. That was back in 2020. That was their estimate, but now it's been pushed to 2026. And that's still up in the air because things could change between now and then for the worse.
So maybe next year, maybe 2026 could get worse if somebody looks at us funny. Okay, and what's the holdup here that they're saying?
There's a bunch of permitting that they have to get. Their plans have to be approved. One has to be approved through the U.S. Coast Guard, and then there's a environmental impact statement that needs to be approved. And also they need to get a lot of this stuff needs to be approved for federal grant funding that they need to pay for the bridge. And right now they haven't even gotten the draft EIS released for public comment.
Now, that stuff didn't just pop up. They knew that was going to have to be done. The EIS has been around for decades and decades in various forms and fashions at multiple levels of government. Was any of this, they had to have foreseen some of this to the point of where they say, all right, well, maybe in 2022, hey, this is going to take a bit more time than we're originally talking?
It really depends on who you ask, because the officials that are working on the plan say what effectively happened is there was a disagreement with the federal agencies that they need to get the approval of regarding the traffic modeling that they're using in their plans. The federal agencies were contending that the traffic modeling was overestimating the amount of traffic or underestimating, but it's this over-predicting ridership is what one official said. And so he's saying that this is very common and this is, these things happen, but that's not what some other people are arguing.
Yeah, you had other people saying that this is just mismanagement. That there was no foresight in terms of the project management of this massive endeavor, right?
Yeah, there was one guy who spoke during the public comment, and what he's effectively arguing is that they knew that the traffic modeling criteria or the what was going to be acceptable for modeling was going to change among the different agencies that they had to collaborate with or at least get the approval of. And they were trying to get this done before that, and they didn't. And now they got to go back and fix this stuff. And so it's like I said, it's depending on who you talk to, because they argue that this is common to have this kind of a setback, but this is a 6 to 18 month setback potentially. And then what happens when they go and they submit it and it gets rejected? Well, then they got to go back and fix that. And then, who knows what then you got to go deal with the workforce availability for that. And so there's other things that are coming into play. But one thing for people to keep in mind is there's been discussions about replacing this bridge for over 10 years. And
this is nothing new.
Yeah, there was the Columbia River crossing that went down in flames back in 2014. It took years for the state legislature to finally come up with a new work group committee to get Oregon back at the table to discuss it. And so this has been just a very long, drawn-out process on this bridge because there's so many different this is just one area of dispute. Then there's also going to be the tolling aspect. Then there's going to be whether it should expand traffic capacity on the roads or whether it should focus more on transit and biking and walking. That was another issue that they're talking about. So the reason the traffic modeling is important is because it's going to be one of the foundations for the final bridge design and what it looks like.
That is an expensive bike path that they're planning, if that's the case, which is incredible. You know what, TJ? Let's take bets later on what gets finished first, the I-5 bridge rebuild or the electric hybrid ferries in the Puget Sound system. Let's see which one comes up first.
That's bad.
Thank you, TJ. Appreciate it. Spokane's Camp Hope, a massive homeless encampment situated on public land, garnered national attention over recent months until it was eventually dismantled. But where did all those homeless campers go? Eastern Washington reporter Tim Klauser covered the county's recent release of homeless data. What were the official numbers in that snapshot, Tim?
So the 2024 point-in-time count for Spokane County was released earlier this week, and it actually noted the first decrease in overall homelessness since 2016. That decrease was 15%, going from 2,390 homeless people in 2023 to now 2,021. And that overall homelessness number includes people that are unsheltered and sheltered. But sheltered homelessness itself increased 10% from last year, meaning that more people are coming off the street and getting into local homeless shelters. That number was 1,435 this year. Unsheltered homelessness decreased significantly, 54% from last year to now 443 people. And out of all those people that were counted this year, 49% reported having a severe mental illness, 38% reported having a substance use disorder, and 9% of those people were veterans.
Now, those numbers are probably largely underreported because that's just the people willing to admit to those, to those substance abuse and such problems and things, which, if you've ever met anybody that has those issues, most of them will not admit to it until they're well down the road of, having it behind them. But Tim, is the large decrease in unsheltered homelessness seen as a reflection of Camp Hope?
At its peak, the encampment had around 600 residents living out of RVs and tents in this parking lot. But it closed in between last year's point-in-time count and this year's point-in-time count, meaning that a lot of those residents are now scattered throughout the county, living on the streets or in shelters also around the county. A lot of those people that were in Camp Hope ended up moving into the Trent shelter in Spokane, which is its large congregate shelter that it's working to close currently. The city also temporarily reopened its Cannon Street shelter during a cold snap. So that's likely why we also see an increase in sheltered homelessness. But like I said before, Camp Hope also closed with the homeless population scattering throughout the entire county, which made it harder to count. Also notably, that Trent shelter had 400 shelter beds available when the point-in-time count took place in January. But now it only has 250 beds available with the way it's decommissioning. So really, that difference in bed alone from January to now completely negates this year's decrease in overall homelessness.
And as we've reported before, local businesses in Spokane, more homeless or fewer homeless, still do seem to be struggling with that. And that's a story that we'll continue to follow. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. And a big thank you to all of our journalists for sharing their stories today. Stay up to date with these and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Cole Lauterbach. And until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.
Welcome to another round of Drawing Board or Miro Board. Today we discuss technical diagramming with systems architect Maya. Let's go. First question. You've spent 10 hours slogging over a sequence diagram that should have taken 5. Drawing board or Miro board?
Drawing board. And if I'm being honest, Miro would probably cut that time down by half. With its AI tools and ready-to-go templates.
Next, your diagrams become so bulky, it's more complex than the solar system. But all it takes is a few clicks and...
It's Miro! I've used those technical shape packs way too many times, and stuff is just digestible on its infinite online canvas.
Now, the final question. Everyone's brought in, but you have to make all these tasks all the way over in Jira. But wait, it's done! Is it...
Miro, easy with its two-way Jira sync. Easy to plot dependencies. Everyone always knows what's up.
And she's done it!
Join over 60 million people creating technical diagrams without workflow glitches. Get your first 3 boards for free at Miro.com. That's MIRO.com.
Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Greedy corporate mega stores, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a law in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. The Durbin-Marshall credit card bill would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, tell your lawmakers, hands off my rewards. Tell them to oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill.